Brooklyn Independent Television.
Many people might not be aware of Brooklyn's role in the fight to eliminate slavery. The Underground Railroad was a big part of those efforts, and there are several historic locations where it is believed to have operated. One such place is the Plymouth Church in Brooklyn Heights. Sherry Carabin takes us inside the church.
This is the last known portrait of Henry Ward Beecher. He was the first minister of the church.
It's been more than 160 years since Henry Ward Beecher was chosen to be pastor at Brooklyn's historic Plymouth Church, but his legacy has not been forgotten. The Brooklyn Heights congregation was begun in 1847 by a group of transplanted New Englanders during a time when the anti-slavery movement had already begun.
New York State did not free their slaves until 1827. And so you still had slavery here in Brooklyn until 1827.
Lois Rosebrooks is director of History Ministry Services at Plymouth Church.
Even after the New York State freed the slaves, New York City was pro-slavery because of business.
But that didn't stop Henry Ward Beecher, who often held sermons in support of women's rights, religious diversity, Native Americans, and especially the abolition of slavery. Under his reign, historians say the church became involved in the Underground Railroad, allowing slaves to be dropped off and remain inside the church until they were picked up and taken elsewhere. In fact, the institution became known as the Grand Central Depot of Brooklyn. So this is where the slaves were kept?
Well, we have no real documentation. However, we have no closets and no attic. So the logical place would be the basement, where people could be hidden there and not be found by somebody from the outside. There would be some sort of a pallet or a mattress on the floor and a chamber pot for your toilet. As soon as we can make arrangements, we will take you to the next safe place. And more than likely from here, the next safe place was the riverfront and a ship that was either going up through the Long Island Sound, up the New England coast, or around and up the Hudson.
Beecher himself was born in Litchfield, Connecticut, and was one of 11 children. His sister, Harriet Beecher Stowe, wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, which many say played a key role in inspiring the Civil War. But Beecher, too, did his part, not only by supporting the Underground Railroad, but also staging mock auctions at the church and encouraging members of the congregation to purchase the freedom of actual slaves.
Beecher liked to show his congregation the face of slavery, because what you saw in the newspapers were cartoon characters, very dark and perhaps very ugly. And so he would say, "Can you please bring this person to the church?"
Perhaps the most famous case is the true story of a 9-year-old slave girl named Pinky, who lived in Washington, D.C. and was being sold by her owner. On February 5, 1860, Beecher brought her before the congregation, asking them to contribute $900 to buy her freedom. The money was raised, with everyone contributing small amounts, including this ring, which she returned to the church when she came back to thank everyone in 1927.
It's a star ruby set in 18-karat gold. And while it's not that precious as jewelry is concerned, it's certainly precious as history is concerned.
During Beecher's time, several prominent anti-slavery advocates spoke out at the church.
Why don't you sit in the Lincoln pew? And then we'll talk about the church.
This is the Lincoln pew?
It certainly is. So we know that this is where Abraham Lincoln sat February 26th of 1860. He observed the congregation, he met some of the members, he met Henry Ward Beecher that day. We do know that Beecher encouraged Lincoln to write the Emancipation Proclamation and went back and forth to Washington on several occasions.
Other well-known visitors have included Frederick Douglass and Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who gave an early version of his I Have a Dream speech in 1963. Beecher died in 1887. But his memory lives on with those at Plymouth determined to keep his spirit of inclusion alive. His gravesite is among those of many other prominent Brooklynites at Greenwood Cemetery on Fifth Avenue. So why did Beecher choose to be buried here?
In 19th century America, you had a smaller New York City with a lot of influential and interesting people, and Greenwood Cemetery became a place where they wanted to be buried because it was considered prestigious. So along with people like Henry Ward Beecher, you'd have Horace Greeley, who was an abolitionist. He was the publisher of the New York Tribune.
Also buried at Greenwood is Susan McKenney Stewart, the first African-American woman to earn a medical degree in New York State.
Some of the things that are worth pointing out is we have here at Greenwood one of the oldest monuments to the Civil War in the United States. The Civil War ended in 1865. This was built in 1869.
Although we've come a long way since the Civil War, Rosebrook says we still have work to do.
Until the 1960s, we did not get rid of segregation, and occasionally we still see it going on in redlining of housing and things like that in current days.
This is Sherry Carabin reporting for Brooklyn Review.
Become a fan on Facebook. Like Brooklyn Independent Television.